and I want to welcome you tonight to the most exciting thing that's happening this evening, online or anywhere in the universe for that matter, as far as I'm concerned. I'll be your co-host, Michael Stamatikos, Professor of Physics and Astronomy at OSU Newark, and this is Blowing Off Steam, a community-based open forum for informal discussions led by, in this case, world experts from academia and industry that address topics in science, technology, engineering, art, and math. That's where we get steam from. We've been doing this since 2017, and I've had the pleasure since 2019 of working with Denison University's Professor Nestor Matthews, who's in the psychology department and director of neuroscience program, and as well, Lucy Chin Parker, who's the Granville Public Library's community engagement administrator. They're both my colleagues here, partners in crime, and they have helped us bring Blowing Off Steam to you this last few years. Before I introduce tonight's esteemed speaker, I'd like to have my colleague, Nestor Matthews, talk about next month's installment. Nestor?
Thanks very much, Mike. And thank you all for being here. Blowing Off Steam occurs on the second Tuesday of every month. So on Tuesday, May 10th, we're delighted to be welcoming our colleague here at Denison University, Dr. Sangeet Kumar, who directs Denison's International Studies program. And he's recently published a book, and that will be the source of our conversation on Tuesday, May 10th. That book is titled The Digital Frontier, and the Digital Frontier addresses some of the standards associated with the World Wide Web and how those standards create some friction occasionally in local cultures and with local values in different regions of the world. So it should be an interesting topic, again, here on Zoom, 7 o'clock on Tuesday, May 10th. Hope to see you. Hope you can join us. Thanks very much, Mike.
Thank you, Nestor. Well, it is truly an honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Michael Shermer. Dr. Michael Shermer is a founding publisher of the Skeptic magazine. He's the host of the podcast, The Michael Shermer Show, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University, where he teaches Skepticism 101. For nearly 2 decades, he was a monthly columnist for the Scientific American magazine, and he's the author of several New York Times bestsellers. I can't list all of them, but I will tell you some of the recent ones and the big ones: Why People Believe Weird Things, The Believing Brain, Why Darwin Matters, and Giving the Devil His Due, Reflections of a Scientific Humanist, to name just a few. He's appeared on shows such as The Colbert Report, 2020, Dateline, Charlie Rose, Oprah, Larry King, so everything that's kind of on the level of Blowing Off Steam. But never made it to Jerry Springer, which I think is a feather in his cap. He's been interviewed in countless documentaries, and maybe one of the best compliments I've seen from Neil deGrasse Tyson is that Michael Shermer is a beacon of reason in an ocean of irrationality. You can join his over 200,000 followers on Twitter at Michael Shermer and find out more about him and how to get his amazing books from his website, michaelshermer.com. Today, he'll be talking about UAPs and UFOs and how scientists think about anomalies. Please help me welcome Dr. Michael Shermer.
All righty. Hi, everybody. I presume you can all hear me and see me okay. Looks like I'm not muted. And thank you, Michael, for that kind introduction. The magazine looks like this, by the way. This is the latest issue on trans matters. We cover a lot of different topics in Skeptic, and so we always like to go for the mildly controversial ones. We do cover a wide variety of topics, like the flat earthers. Who says the earth is flat and why do they say it? And this is really a nice cover because it nicely captures what it is their worldview looks like, if it looks like anything. Although the gray stuff here doesn't really exist because this is the entire universe there. So anyway, if you want to know what their arguments are and why they make those arguments, you can go to skeptic.com. We've done a lot on UFOs. Here's the man who invented the flying saucers, an artist, and we did an issue on theologians confront the possibilities of extraterrestrial life. That is, to what extent would people's religious beliefs be affected if we actually did make contact with extraterrestrial intelligences? Interestingly, the old memes that things would fall apart and people would abandon their religions if they discovered there was aliens is not borne out in polls. A number of studies have asked religious people of many faiths to what extent they would be affected by it, and almost no one says they would give up their faith. In fact, they have an idea about God as being large enough that it doesn't really affect the aliens at all. Namely, that God is if God is all powerful and all knowing and and so forth. He can go to as many planets as he wants anywhere in the cosmos, since he created the whole thing. So I think that's interesting that that the discovery of that would not affect people's religious beliefs. We did another one on kind of medieval and early modern art, and to what extent the objects that are in the skies represent possibly UFOs or extraterrestrial spacecraft, but the ancient artists didn't know to draw them at, so they drew them as in these kind of different figures. And in fact, we show in consulting art historians that these are standard motifs and iconography of religious beliefs at the time that had nothing to do with aliens and everything to do with angels and the supernatural God, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and so on. Okay, so today's lecture is, I'm titling Deities for Atheists and Sky Gods for Skeptics. Along that theme, let me share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint. And here we go. And go to full screen here. So I chose this title because it nicely captures what I think is going on here. That is, I think the belief that we're being visited by aliens has a kind of religious overtone to it, or undercurrent. That is to say, the aliens are always described as the super advanced, super technologically advanced moral beings far beyond our lowly ways. And, they come from the sky up there. So I call them sky gods for skeptics, or deities for atheists. And I think that's what's behind it all, that, the evidence that we've been visited or that they are out there is slim to none. It's pretty crummy. And nevertheless, huge percentages of people believe that we have made contact or that they are out there. And so the question is why? Since the evidence is so thin, why do people believe? So I'm going to come back to that at the end of the lecture. Again, some of our issues of skeptic, including Roswell. We did one on Roswell. But by the way, this is a painting, not a photograph. Okay. In our recent issue, we discussed the UFO sightings that are now called UAPs, including the 60 Minutes coverage of it. Astonishingly, the kind of legendary news magazine show 60 Minutes covered the topic, which got a lot of attention. Understandably, ufologists went crazy, thinking, well, this is proof that this subject is now serious. Okay, serious, yes, but what does it represent? That's the question. On that show was this gentleman named Lou Elizondo, reportedly the former head of a $22 million program instigated by Senator Harry Reid called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And here's what Lou Elizondo said, quote, "The government has already stated," this is in response to the 60 Minutes correspondent who asked him, what, are these things real? And his response was, "The government has already stated for the record that they're real. I'm not telling you that. The United States government is telling you that." Okay, that word real is doing a lot of work here. When the Pentagon and other government agencies said they're real, what they meant is these photographs and videos we've all been seeing. I'll go through these in a minute. The videos are real. The photographs are real. In other words, they're not CGI. They're not fake photos. And I'll show you how to make some in this lecture. Make your own fake UFO videos. They're saying they're not fake. These are not CGI. These are real videos. That's all they mean. But I can't tell you how many articles I've read, blog posts, podcasts, TV shows that have picked up on that particular sentence. They're real. And everybody hears that to mean the government says the aliens are here. No, that is not what the government is saying. Nobody is saying that. So that's a kind of uncharitable reading of what that word means. It's doing a lot of work that it need not do. In any case, are we to believe that this is real? I mean, what does that mean, real? If you were on a airliner, just taking off from, say, LAX here in Southern California, where I live, and you looked out the window and saw that, or you saw that, what would you think? I mean, would you think that's definitely an alien spacecraft? Or would you think It looks like a Mylar balloon to me. Mind you, this is what was shown on the 60 Minutes episode, and including repeated the next night on Fox News on Tucker Carlson show. He loves aliens and UFOs. So they're repeating one of the photographs from CBS of what seems clear enough to me to be a Mylar balloon. So a few of the others are a little more tricky to explain, but in general, they go into this category of blurry photographs, grainy videos, and anecdotes about spooky, weird things in the sky. This is the quality of the evidence. The evidence is no better now than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago when we started Skeptic magazine, 50 years ago when Carl Sagan was investigating these sightings, 60, 70 years ago when the huge first UFO wave started in the 1940s. And it's never gotten any better than this. It's just grainy videos, blurry photographs. You kind of squint and look at it and go, I don't know, what am I looking at? And then the mind fills in the gap. This is what you're looking at, or somebody tells you this is what you're looking at. This is called the gimbal UAP. UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon. I should have clarified that. It's a less pejorative name than UFOs. And but the person doing the heavy lifting on this is a guy named Mick West. He is a videographer and computer game developer turned conspiracy theory investigator initially, and then now probably the world's leading expert on analyzing these UAP videos. This one, Gimbal, and the other one related to it, FLIR 1, says West, are what one would see if a jet were flying away from the camera, thus accounting for the eyewitness accounts that the object showed no directional control surfaces or exhaust. Again, let me go back to it. So, there it is. It's hard to say what it is because it's not really moving. Because if the object is moving directly toward us or away from us, it doesn't look like it's moving at all. But that would be the effect you would get if a jet was coming straight at you or away from you. And that was the exhaust from the, say, twin engines. Also, it's blurry, so it's going to be kind of oblong like that. That, if you hear, is my dog. So sorry about that. We all have home studios now. His name is Hitch. I named him after Christopher Hitchens, and the UPS truck just dropped by. So my Hitch is going crazy here. So, and as Mick continues here, the apparent shapes as saucer-like and the Tic Tac UFO, which looks like a little Tic Tac, are due to glare on the lens of the camera. What we're seeing in the distance is essentially just the glare of a hot object, most likely that of an engine, maybe a pair of engines, like with an FA-18 jet, something like that, he says. Another interesting thing that Mick noticed was this particular video showing this object. The object is in the center of the screen, and then all of a sudden it just zooms off to the left, like here. And much has been made of this video that, like, oh my God, this thing is moving so fast that it cannot be explained as any kind of aerodynamical engineering or physics technology or science that we have developed or even understand. The speed at which it suddenly shoots off to the left would kill the pilot if it was a normal aircraft. And so it's got to be an extraterrestrial craft with super advanced physics and engineering and aerodynamics, or the alternative hypothesis is that it's a super advanced Russian or Chinese drone or aircraft spying on our military bases or hovering over our airspace. What Mick noticed is that, see this thing up here in the upper left corner. It says zoom, Z-O-O-M, zoom. Here it says 1.0. Over here, the zoom says 2.0. This entire effect is nothing more than the camera zooming in on the object. So the object is not moving suddenly to the left. The camera is just zooming in on it. So the object is just simply coming closer in the lens of the camera. And you can see that it's doubled in size and it's moved twice as far away. It's not moving at all. It's just the camera zooming in. And so I mean, it's just, to me, it's embarrassing that anybody with two neurons that are wired together can miss this and talk about like, this is the best evidence we have. And you hear these people online on these shows just waxing just poetically, oh my God, this is it. We finally made contact with extraterrestrials. Here it is, definitive proof, 100%. The government says they're real, and there it is. And astonishingly, no one goes, you know what? Maybe it's just a camera effect. Okay. Anyway, it's pretty crazy. Here's the Go Fast video. It's this little tiny white dot. Again, grainy video, blurry, can't quite make out what's going on. Here's what McWest says about it. Because of the extreme zoom and because the camera is locked onto this object, the motion of the ocean in this video is actually exactly the same as the motion of the jet plane itself. You're seeing something that's actually hardly moving at all. And all of the apparent motion is the parallax effect from the jet flying by. So it's probably just a balloon just hovering above the ocean a little ways. And they, so just picture this jet with a bottom mounted camera. And as the jet is moving, the camera is tracking the object. And so the object is locked into the camera. And the rest of the effect, in which the object looks like it's flying really fast over the ocean, it's probably not barely moving at all. It's the jet that's moving. Okay, so I've heard people criticize Mick. Mick is one of our columnists for Skeptic magazine, by the way, and he has his own website, MetaBunk. It's called, I highly recommend it, MetaBunk. And where he goes into great detail on these videos and shows the math behind how he gets his calculations. That is, all these numbers actually mean something, and he knows what they mean. Say, well, what does he know? He's not an aerospace engineer. He's not a physicist. He's just a game designer. Well, in fact, Mick knows a lot about cameras and lenses and video effects. And that's what we're looking at here. These are camera video effects, very, very likely. Like I'd put it at like 99.9% likely. Video artifacts and things like that, rather than extraterrestrial or Russian or Chinese. Okay. Here's another one called the Sphere video. Here's what Navy pilot Ryan Graves told 60 Minutes correspondent Bill Whitaker, that he had seen UAPs like this, quote, every day for at least a couple of years. Okay, just let that soak in for a second. If that's true, what else would be true? Well, as I write here, if true, given that nearly every passenger has a smartphone with a high definition camera, and by the way, these objects always appear on the coast. So people at the beach, people driving along Coast Highway, people just walking along the beach and so on, they have their cameras. There should be thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of clear and unmistakable photographs and videos of these UAPs. You know how many there are? None. Zero. Nobody has filmed these. Okay. Or when they do, they look like this. Okay. That's not a good sign. Here, as I say, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Okay. Oh, by the way, somebody in response to this same lecture I gave somewhere else, somebody sent me a video of a blurry object that he swore was probably an extraterrestrial or some mysterious object. It was blinking at the exact same rate as an airliner blinks, and its lights, you know, red light on one side and a green light on the other side of the, this is FAA standard requirements for airliners to have these lights and to blink at a certain rate, as this video showed. And I pointed that out, and he's like, oh, never mind. That again, this is the quality of evidence that we are confronted with, presented, like this guy who posted this video, Jeremy Corbell. He's online every day saying, we have made contact. You know, the greatest story in the history of humanity is unfolding before our very eyes. And when I ask him for evidence, this is what we get. Okay. That's not good evidence, as we'll see. Another one. Here's another one of these. This one, the video shows this little triangular shaped thing is blinking. Okay, ufologists get very excited about triangles. Okay, for some reason, the aliens like to build triangle shaped spacecraft. Why would a spacecraft need to be triangle shaped? It's, you know, delta wing aircrafts because they fly through the atmosphere. Spacecraft coming from other planets, they don't have to be delta shaped because they're not going through air, they're going through space. Nevertheless, the video of this shows this triangle. It's blinking at the exact rate of an airliner, a commercial airliner. Again, same example. And this was filmed by a ship, camera on a ship, underneath the approach to LAX. Okay, end of story. What about the triangle? It's out of focus. So Mick found one of these cameras where the iris of the camera is, triangular shaped. So that's the kind of thing you're going to get. Okay. Now, again, much has been made about this, not only 60 Minutes, but the New York Times published this oft-quoted story, Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program. Okay, pretty much every show, every blog, every documentary, everything I've ever seen since this article was published says, oh my God, the New York Times says they're real. Okay, again, New York Times is not saying anything is real. They're just saying the Pentagon had this UFO program. They didn't call it that. And the program was only $22 million, which by government programs is like 1 day's worth of a budget of a normal government agency. So it's nothing. But nevertheless, much is made about it. So who are these authors? The New York Times. Helene Cooper covers Pentagon matters for the New York Times. So she's a real journalist. Ralph Blumenthal is an author who wrote a biography of John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who kind of launched the modern alien abduction movement in the 1990s when he started treating patients who said they'd been abducted by aliens. When? In the middle of the night, like when they're dreaming. Okay, but he took them literally, and Mack did. And this guy, Ralph Blumenthal, wrote a biography of Mack. And Leslie Keane is probably the best known UFO journalist working today. She'd been trying to get this article published in the New York Times for a long time. And she has a best-selling book out that I wrote about in Scientific American. This was my column at the time, UFOs, UAPs, and CRAPs, completely ridiculous aerial phenomenon. Here's her book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. Okay, so let's take her words literally and start from building a case there. Here's what she writes. Okay, it's hard for me to see this because of this thing. Let me move it. Oh, Keane asks readers to consider with an open and truly skeptical mind that such sightings represent, quote, a solid physical phenomenon that appears to be under intelligent control and capable of speeds, maneuverability, and luminosity beyond current known technology. That the US government routinely ignores UFOs and when pressed issues false explanations. And that the hypothesis that UFOs are of extraterrestrial or interdimensional origin is a rational one and must be taken into account given the data we have. Okay, let me unpack this a little bit here. It's not that the US government ignores them. The US government is very aware of aerial phenomenon that is in our airspace. They just don't make a lot of public statements about it. When pressed, they issue false explanations. Well, usually they don't say anything. Here, the references to what the government said after Roswell in 1947, that something crashed in Roswell. Okay, what was it? Well, it turns out it was a high altitude spy balloon with acoustic equipment on board that was listening for Soviet nuclear tests because we were worried that they were about to get the bomb. And guess what? They did. So it was reasonable to be concerned about that. This is about when the Cold War started. So, of course, when one of these long balloon trains with the acoustic equipment and stuff crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, and people asked, well, what is it? The government didn't come out and say, oh, well, it's a spy balloon because we're listening for the acoustic signatures of Soviet nuclear tests because this is the Cold War. Of course, they're not going to tell us that. So they made up a story about it being a weather balloon and so on. So this, sends ufologists off on a tangent about how the government lies to its citizens. Well, no kidding. That's not a new story. And then, okay, is it rational to think that UFOs represent extraterrestrial or interdimensional beings or something? Yes, of course, it's completely rational in the sense that the question, are they out there somewhere, is a different question than have they come here, okay? So many astronomers and related scientists are interested in the question of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They're mainly listening for radio signals or signs or some kind of pattern that comes from space that could not be explained through natural phenomena like rotating black holes or quasars or anything like that. And they do find signals through these radio telescopes. And so far, they've all turned out to be either something extraterrestrial that's natural, like a rotating black hole or a quasar, or they turn out to be terrestrial, like a jet flying by, or some ground-based object making these signals. Okay, so but it's worth the search. We haven't found anything yet, but it's worth the search because it's a reasonable argument to make that, given there's several 100 billion stars in every galaxy, and there's upwards of several 100 billion to possibly 1 trillion galaxies in the known universe, and given that the rate of planetary formation around those hundreds of billions of stars in every galaxy is quite high, that is, most stars have planets, no matter how unlikely it is that life will form on any one given particular planet, if you have enough of them, the law of large numbers says they're likely to be out there somewhere. Now, that's just sort of a armchair, back in the envelope kind of calculation that you can make. That's not empirical evidence. No one has found any signals. You might remember the scene from Carl Sagan's Contact film with Jodie Foster, with the cans on her head, sitting on the roof of the hood of her car, listening for signals, and all of a sudden prime numbers start popping into her earphones, and a sequence of prime numbers would not be something that, say, a rotating black hole or a quasar would be doing. So she correctly surmised that was probably of alien intelligence origin. Okay, so that's completely reasonable. But the question is the kind of evidence I've just shown you, does that represent good evidence that we actually have made contact? All right, so this is a signal detection problem. The signal in the noise, that is the blob on the radar, does that represent, or the whatever your measuring device is, radio telescope or whatever, does that represent something extraterrestrial? Okay, in my opinion, the evidence is too thin still to draw that conclusion, but it's not like a perpetual motion machine. That can't be true, right? The patent office does not accept applications for perpetual motion machines because they can't possibly work because of the second law of thermodynamics or entropy. So this is not in that category. There could be aliens out there, and it's highly unlikely, but not impossible, that they've come here or they are coming here. And so we have to keep an open mind. But the question is how good is the evidence? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so let's look at our alternatives for hypotheses. You see something in the sky. What is it? Okay, here's what Leslie Keane herself says in her own book. According to Leslie Keane, roughly 90 to 95% of all UFO sightings can be explained as weather balloons, flares, sky lanterns, planes flying in formation, secret military aircraft, birds reflecting the sun, planes reflecting the sun, blimps, helicopters, the planets Venus or Mars, meteors or meteorites, space junk, satellites, swamp gas, spinning eddies, sundogs, ball lightning, ice crystals, reflected light off the clouds, lights on the ground or lights reflected in the cockpit window, and more. Okay, so here's our two bins. We have one bin that contains 90 to 95% of all the sightings that are in that list or more. Then you have this other little bin of 5 to 10% of things we don't have an explanation for. What do you do with those? Okay, this is called the residue problem in science. In all fields of science, there's a residue of anomalies that are unexplained by the dominant theory. That does not mean that the prevailing theory is wrong or that the alternative theories are right. It just means that more work needs to be done to bring those anomalies into the accepted paradigm. And it's always just okay to say, I don't know. Okay, remember the U in UFO or the U in UAP just means unidentified. That's all it means. Unidentified does not mean extraterrestrial. It doesn't mean government cover-up or conspiracy or your pet idea is right. All it means is, I don't know what I saw. That's all it means, okay? All right, so, and here again, let's look at her best case. This is her first chapter, this is the best case we have, all right? Keane opens her exploration on a very solid ground with a major general's firsthand chronicle of one of the most vivid and best documented UFO cases ever, the UFO wave over Belgium in 1989/90. Okay. Major General, let me move my little slide here, Wilfred de Brouwer's recounting of the sightings. Here is the Major General recounting describing the sightings. So note the verbiage, note the words, and then how Leslie Keane rewrites those words in her book. And we'll make a comparison here because it's very emblematic of how these stories get exaggerated. Hundreds of people saw a majestic triangular craft with a span of approximately 120 feet and powerful beaming spotlights moving very slowly without making any significant noise, but in several cases accelerating to very high speeds. Okay. Here is de Brouwer's narrative, according to Leslie Keane's same description in her book. Common sense tells us that if a government had developed a huge craft that can hover motionless only a few hundred feet up and then speed off in the blink of an eye, all without making a sound, such technology would have revolutionized air travel in modern warfare and probably physics as well. Yeah, indeed. If it were true. So again, let's ask ourselves this question. What's more likely, that 400 years of physics since Newton is all wrong, it's all going to be overturned, or that some guy just got it wrong? He just thought he saw something and he misperceived what he thought he saw. What's more likely? Okay. Note how 120, now I'm going to compare the two narratives. Note how a 120-foot craft becomes huge. Okay, first of all, how do you know it's 120 feet? Okay, these sightings are almost always made where you can't quite make out what you're seeing, what the distance is, how big it is. There's no yardstick out there to compare it to. It's often dusk or dawn. You can't quite see things, compared to what, right? How moving very slowly, according to the general, changes to hover motionless. Okay, hovering motionless is different than moving very slowly. How without making any significant noise shifts to without making a sound. And how accelerating to very high speeds transforms into speed off in the blink of an eye. Okay, so this language transmutation, probably unintentional, is common in UFO narratives, making it harder for scientists to provide natural explanations. Okay, I have some institutional memory of this. I've been studying this since I was really just in college, and then we've been studying it seriously for 30 years since we founded Skeptic magazine. This is the kind of thing you encounter over and over and over. Not just the grainy videos and the blurry photographs, but the stories themselves keep transmutating, and they get harder and harder to explain because they make it impossible by exaggerating these what people said that they saw. Okay, and in almost every UFO documentary I've ever seen, they rarely show much footage because there isn't that much, and the footage we have is pretty crappy. It's just really grainy and blurry and so on. So they have artists render what eyewitnesses said they saw, and then so you see this little CGI or a kind of artist rendition of what the UFO ship looked like in great detail. But that isn't what anyone saw. All we have is the memory of the people who said, this is what I remember seeing. And we know that eyewitness testimony is not reliable. Okay. People exaggerate, they confabulate, they misremember. And then once they've done that and they've told the story, that's the new memory. There's no, let me just have a little sidebar in memory. There's no recording device in the head. There's no little Cartesian theater with a screen in which the little homunculus in your head is looking at the screen and the world is whirring by through our senses. There's nothing even remotely like that, right? Perception is percepts are processed by the brain into these ever-changing, ever-edited memories. And once the new memory is formed from retelling it, that's it. That's the new memory now. The old memory is gone, right? So that's why we need to have actual concrete evidence that eyewitness accounts are not reliable. Or just to kind of take this delta wing shaped description. Okay, it's not surprising that that people see triangles and other objects when the information is degraded, when you can't quite make out what's going on. The brain fills in the shapes for us. It's a very common experience. So let's return to this residue problem. Again, in all fields of science, there's a residue of anomalies unexplained by the dominant theory, as I said before. And so if we start off with 90 to 95% of all UFO sightings are explicable by terrestrial phenomena. So the extraterrestrial hypothesis is either unnecessary or it's very unlikely. So there's her, again, her list. So you see an object in the sky. What could it be? So you have two choices, or really three, Russian, Chinese assets, extraterrestrials, or from this long list here. Okay, what's it most likely to be? In the big bin of 90 to 95%, just by a kind of a Bayesian calculation of what's more likely. Okay. So the entire extraterrestrial hypothesis is based on this one little tiny bin of anomalies. And so what's left? Not much. So this is what's called the base rate neglect. 95% of all X can be explained by Y. X appears again. What's more likely? Y is the explanation or something else? Okay, so here's our three hypotheses currently on the table for what these UAPs and UFOs represent. Ordinary terrestrial, that long list of things that Leslie Keane listed there, and plus McWest's camera lens effects, visual illusions, balloons, and so on. Two, extraterrestrial, extraordinary terrestrial, that is Russian or Chinese planes or drones, capable of feats of physics and aerodynamics unheard of in the United States. Or three, extraordinary extraterrestrial, that is aliens, okay? So ordinary terrestrial, extraordinary terrestrial, and extraordinary extraterrestrial. Okay, let's look at these. Here again, this institutional memory, the historian Mike Dash's description of the 1896-1897 series of these mysterious airships. Here's his words. Again, this is nothing new. This is from the 1890s. Not only were the mystery airships bigger, faster, and more robust than anything then produced by the aviators of the world. Remember, this is pre-mechanical flight. They seemed to be able to fly enormous distances, and some were equipped with giant wings. The files of almost 1,500 newspapers from across the United States have been combed for reports, an astonishing feat of research. The general conclusion of the investigators was that a considerable number of the simpler sightings were misidentification of planets and stars. And in fact, we know that some of them were even faked. Okay. Oops. Turn that up there. Okay. Here are a couple of UFOs that are from the past. This is like from the 1960s and 70s. Here's another one. This is probably one of the more famous ones. Here's another one that looks kind of like the previous one. Okay, these last two I made up. Okay, these two are real, whatever real means here. These two we made. That's actually the top of a licorice box. There it is, and we're just dangling it with fishing line that you can't see. We produced a whole segment on how to fake your own UFO photographs for the Fox Family channel back in 2000. And you can just take hubcaps and toss them. I'll show you some more of these here. You're just dangling it from a tall ladder. And so again, in science, we have to ask what's more likely, an explanation that, in this case, a natural explanation or a supernatural or extraterrestrial explanation. What's more likely, that aliens traversed the vast distances of interstellar space and landed in Farmer Bob's field in Parker Brush, Kansas, and made a crop circle that says skeptic.com, or that somebody with Photoshop faked this for me? Okay, what's more likely? That Arnold, the my governor of California for many years, was helped in his campaign by the aliens, or that the World Weekly News just makes stuff up? Okay. Before you say something is out of this world, first make sure that it's not in this world. We have no evidence of aliens helping Arnold or any other visitation, but we have lots of evidence that tabloid newspapers just make stuff up. They lie all the time. Okay, so let's look at this a little more statistically in a Bayesian way. Again, do these sightings represent aliens, and are UFOs their spacecraft? Here is the iconic image from one of my favorite science fiction films of all time, The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. And it's really an interesting story, back to where we began and where I will end this lecture, namely that it's kind of a religious impulse that's behind all this. This film is a Christ allegory. The spaceship lands near the White House, and Klaatu here, the alien played by Michael Rennie, takes on an earthly name because he wants to meet with the authorities, but the authorities reject him. So he mingles among the common people like Jesus did. His earthly name was Mr. Carpenter, which they gave him to make it clear that this is a Christ allegory. And Patricia Neal, his love interest in the film, sort of, is kind of the Mary Magdalene character. And Gort the robot is there to threaten Earthlings if they don't mend their ways about nuclear weapons. Okay, there was a remake with Keanu Reeves, who plays Klaatu, and the new threat that the aliens are warning us about is global warming rather than nuclear weapons. Although I still think nuclear weapons are a far greater threat than global warming, but that's a different subject. Any case, so, and if you recall, if you haven't seen this film, you should see it. This one's way better than the remake. It's online; you can watch it for free. And here, he ultimately ends up visiting with the scientists because the politicians won't meet with him. He delivers his warning, and then they consider him a threat, so they track him down and kill him. And he's put in a morgue. And then Patricia Neal, in this famous scene, has to go to Gort the robot and give him this special command. Let me see if I can remember it. Gort Klaatu Barada Nikto. That's it. One of the more famous lines in science fiction history. And basically, the command is go get Klaatu. He's locked up in the morgue. So he kind of goes to the morgue is like the empty tomb, right? The authorities go back to the empty tomb and he's gone. Well, where did he go? Well, Gort took him back to the spaceship and resurrected him. He was dead, and he resurrected him after 3 days. And in the original script for the film, she's standing there and she says to him, when he's now resurrected from the dead, "Wow, that's incredible. Is this the kind of technology you aliens have? You have control over life and death?" And in the original script, he goes, "Yeah." But in the 1950s, the Breen Censorship Board said, "You can't say that. Only religions are allowed to say that." So they changed it. And he says some lame line about, no, only the great spirit in the sky can control life, or some such thing. Anyway, and then he gives his message and he zooms off into the sky like the ascension of Jesus to heaven. Okay. So again, back to that impulse. I think that's really what's going on here. In any case, here's another one of these alien spacecraft, UFOs over Southern California. This is my front yard. And here's another one up here. Here's another one zooming. That's downtown Los Angeles there. This is Pasadena. And, if these look like hubcaps, that's because that's what they are. We were just tossing hubcaps over my cliff. Here I am with a different one holding a big, it's just a coffee table piece of glass. It's my daughter taking a picture through it. That's the film crew from National Geographic. This was a different episode we shot where we faked UFO photographs. In this case, I took coins and taped them to the piece of glass, and then had my daughter focus on infinity through the glass with the coins double taped onto the glass, and it ends up looking like that. Again, that triangle shape. And imagine if these were lights and it was dark, the mind would fill in and say, "Ooh, it was a triangular shaped spacecraft." Okay. This is not to say that all these videos and photographs are fake. Most of them are not fake. They represent something else like in that list. But the fact that it's so easy to do tells us that our senses can't be trusted. And again, it just means unidentified. It just means I don't know. It doesn't mean extraterrestrial. It doesn't mean your pet theory is right. It just means the unknown. Here's another one that my webmaster William sent me of a UFO. It's just a reflection in the window he's looking out. This is a huge window here. And that's the reflection of the ceiling light behind him. Okay. Again, people, even pilots in jets don't notice that the thing that they're looking at out there is just on the window. It's on the windshield. It's the light behind them. Okay. This happens all the time. Stunning. So here it's good that we apply David Hume's principle of proportionality. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence, or as Carl Sagan more famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is the ICRI principle, and it's good to apply in these cases. That is to say, your extraordinary claim is not true until proven otherwise. And here we say that the burden of proof is on the claimant, not the skeptic or the scientist, to disprove the claim. And that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if you show me a UAP or UFO video or photograph and say, explain it. Well, maybe I can, but maybe I can't. But the burden of proof is not on me to explain anything. It's on the person making the claim. I am sure this is a UFO. I'm sure this is a alien spacecraft or a Russian drone or something. The burden of proof is on you to prove that, not on me to disprove it, okay? So let's return to our three hypotheses of ordinary terrestrial, extraordinary terrestrial, or extraordinary extraterrestrial. Again, remember that base rate effect, a UAP appears again. What's more likely? That it's explained by one, that is some ordinary terrestrial phenomenon, or that it's explained by extraordinary terrestrial, Russian or Chinese assets, or extraordinary extraterrestrial aliens, okay? That the 400 years of science, technology, and engineering have been overturned, or that some observer got it wrong. Okay, it's obvious which one is more likely. Now, the reason I argue here, I'll just put the words up there. Let me just say it off the top of my head. The reason it's very unlikely to be an extraordinary terrestrial phenomenon like a Chinese or Russian drone or aircraft is that this is not how the history of technology and science evolves. Nobody invents anything out of whole cloth, out of thin air, that no one else knows about. Every invention ever studied has predecessors to it. This is why there's always simultaneous discoveries in both science and technology, from the telephone to the light bulb to the search engines to rockets to airplanes and aircraft. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing. We watch each other, we read each other's stuff, we steal each other's secrets. It would be as if the as I put here, it would be as if the United States were using rotary phones while the Russians or Chinese had smartphones, or we were flying biplanes while they were flying F-18 fighter jets and stealth bombers, or we were sending letters and memos via fax machines while they were emailing massive files via the internet, or we were still experimenting with captured German V-2 rockets while they were testing SpaceX level rocketry. Okay, this would never happen because we would know about it. Just think about the Manhattan Project, the most secret scientific project in history. And we built a bomb in 1945. By 1949, the Russians had their own bomb. How did they do it? They stole our secrets. They had a spy. Okay, so it's impossible that the Russians or Chinese could have created some kind of super advanced drone or aerial craft of whatever make, and we would have no idea. That's impossible. We would know. We steal their stuff. Just think of the levels to which internet companies like Google and Apple go through to protect their property, their intellectual property, and their patents and so on. I mean, they sue each other like crazy over even the slightest resemblance of a technology that was ripped off. But they're all ripping each other off, right? That's how it works. There's no possible way that, say, Samsung or Google or Apple would come up with something completely different a century ahead of everybody else, or even a decade ahead of everybody else, without them knowing about it. That's just not how it works. Okay, we can dismiss extraordinary terrestrial. As for extraordinary terrestrial, if there are ETIs in our galaxy, despite the vast numbers of planets and vast distances between stellar systems, the chance of them finding Earth and visiting us even once is staggeringly low, let alone buzzing our airspace on a daily basis. Again, this guy on 60 Minutes, Navy pilot Ryan Graves, every day for at least a couple of years, he's seen these things. Okay, stunning. Where are the photographs? Where we should have thousands, but we have nothing. Okay, so that tells us very, very unlikely that we're being visited by aliens. Not impossible, but very unlikely. So what do you do if somebody has no evidence? Here I invoke what I call Hitchens' dictum after the great Christopher Hitchens. What can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. More simply, when people tell me Bigfoot is real, I say, show me the body and I'll believe. Otherwise, I remain skeptical. This is called the null hypothesis in science. That is, your hypothesis is not true. That's the assumption we're going to make until you prove otherwise. And I would apply that to aliens, right? In biology, if you want to name a new species, you actually have to have a type specimen. You can't show up at a biology conference and say, hey, I made a new discovery of a new species. Oh, yeah? Where is it? Oh, well, here, I have this kind of grainy, blurry photograph. And if you squint and use your imagination, you can kind of see a bipedal primate in the bushes over there. Sorry, your colleagues are going to go, no, you got to actually have a body, show it to us. And then, or else, go get it, right? So I also find it telling that among the thousands of government documents and files leaked in recent years through WikiLeaks, there's not one mention of a UFO cover-up, a fake moon landing, or for that matter, that 9/11 was an inside job by the Bush administration. Here, the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. Okay, let me just kind of finish up here just with the most famous case of Roswell, because the Roswell, I think, is emblematic of what's really going on here. It has to do with myth making and that religious impulse I mentioned. Again, we know what it was. The author of this article for us, Duke Gildenberger, he worked on this high altitude balloon project. Oh, I thought I had a picture of it, but I don't. Oh, I wanted to make a note about Roswell. In 1967, Ted Glicker published Report on the UFO Wave of 1947. Okay, Roswell was summer of 1947. He listed 843 UFO sightings carried by news media. Roswell did not even make the list. No crash debris, no alien bodies, no eyewitnesses, no conspiracies, etc. Roswell began in 1980 with a National Enquirer story. Okay, so the Roswell incident, the Roswell story, it's just a myth. By which I mean it's a story. And it's not about what happened in 1947. It's about what happened in 1980 and after. That is, we concocted a story that then got exaggerated. Okay, so through the 1940s and 50s and 60s, there was all these different things going on related to the testing of experimental aircraft in the desert where the sightings are often made and so on. But it's not until 1978 to 1980 when Stan Friedman interviewed Jesse Marcel and media outlets like the National Enquirer and the documentary film UFOs Are Real embraced this guy Marcel as a crash saucer whistleblower. He was one of the people that said he knew what happened at Roswell. So that's when Roswell really begins, when the gray aliens triumph over competitors. The aliens used to look like all different, like a zoo, like the Star Wars bar scene. Then aliens emerged after all these stories and all this media coverage to kind of be a uniform shape, that kind of spindly shape, large head, almond-shaped eyes, no ears, and so on. And so it was in the 1990s that all of these things happened that elevated Roswell into a mythic status. And so finally in 1995, here at the bottom, the Pentagon published the Roswell Report, Fact and Fiction in the New Mexico Desert. And they said, this is what we were doing. It was a high altitude spy balloon. And then they gave a final report 2 years later, the Roswell Report, Case Closed, in which they dealt with claims about the alien bodies. And so here's the crash debris. I mean, if you look at the photograph, I mean, this does not look like what technology from some super advanced alien spaceship would look like. It looks like what it is. It's just tinfoil and balsa wood and what a balloon train would look like. So, what we're looking at here is just this stuff here and here. The rest of this long balloon train is just to get it in the upper atmosphere. You can see its size compared to the Seattle SeaTac tower there. So I'll just finish with this article I wrote for one of my Scientific American columns, what I called Sky Gods for Skeptics, as a kind of a religious impulse. And here I talk about this research by my colleague Clay Routledge here in the right column in an article he wrote called We Are Not Alone, that he published in the journal Motivation and Emotion. Okay, so it's not published in a physics or cosmology or astronomy journal. It's published in a psychology journal because that's what this is. It's a psychological effect. So he and his colleagues found an inverse relation between religiosity and extraterrestrial intelligence beliefs. That is, Those who report low levels of religious belief, but high desire for meaning, show greater belief in ETIs. In study 1, subjects who read an essay arguing that human life is ultimately meaningless and cosmically insignificant were statistically significantly more likely to believe in ETIs than those who read an essay on the limitations of computers. That was just the control group. In study 2, subjects who self-identified as either atheist or agnostic were statistically significantly more likely to report believing in ETIs than those who reported being religious, primarily Christian. In studies 3 and 4, subjects completed a religiosity scale, a meaning in life scale, a well-being scale, and an ETI belief scale, and then finally a religious supernatural belief scale. And the authors conclude lower presence of meaning and higher search for meaning were associated with greater belief in ETIs. In other words, what I'm arguing here is that it's kind of a modern religious myth. The whole subject of aliens visiting UFOs, UAPs, SETI program, all of it, all the science fiction stories, novels, films that we love, it's all kind of a modern secular religion grounded in reality, grounded in natural laws and so on, but it's still tapping that deep human impulse, that kind of God hole that we have, if we have such a thing, that just kind of this need to think that there is something else out there that's bigger than us and knows we're here, especially that latter part. That's always an important element in the UFO stories. You know, I mean, it would be far less interesting to discover some ancient civilization on another planet, but they're gone. It's far more interesting to think they've come here and they know we're here, you know, that kind of thing. Like the Day the Earth Stood Still. It's a religious film, really. And I consider, like Carl Sagan's Cosmos, to be a very spiritual, I wouldn't say religious film series, but very, very spiritual in that sense of that quest for the deepest meaning to place us in the universe. Why are we here? Where are we going? Where did we come from? What does it all mean? These kinds of ultimate existential questions are being tapped by these stories. And that's why I think the rates of belief are as high as they are, especially with the decline of mainstream religion. I mean, the fastest growing religious cohort in the Western world are the nuns, the people who took the box for no religious affiliation. Every mainstream religious community is shrinking in size dramatically, many percentage points for each of them. You know, the percentage of Americans believing in God, for example, has gone way down. Much more for religious attendance and commitment to religion, but still, it's a significant two-digit number. And so I'm postulating that these kind of beliefs are a proxy for that. It's a kind of a secular religion. Anyway, so that's my lecture on sky gods for skeptics. All right, I'll stop sharing there and we can turn it over to questions or whatever you'd like to do.
Well, thank you. Let's thank Dr. Shermer for a wonderful presentation. And we're kind of at the 8 o'clock mark, but maybe we can take a couple questions. There are some questions in the chat that are a little bit lengthy, so just feel free to unmute your mic and begin.
Oh, I see. So, oh yeah. So let's go ahead and have somebody just ring in if they'd like.
Yeah.
Or maybe put your hand up in the, or whatever you want to do. It looks like AW has a long analysis about Mick West rotating glare theory.
Yeah, there were some technical questions in the chat.
Well, that's okay. Those are great. I would direct people to Mick's website again, metabunk.com. Because there he goes on for hours and hours, these long videos and huge long documents about how cameras work and the glares and flares and the FLIR one and the what happens when the camera rotates and the jet moves and so on. That's probably beyond my pay scale for understanding that, because I don't study videos and lenses like he does. So there I'd recommend that. But I don't have a hard out here. I can stay on if anybody would like to chime in.
Yeah, I think I can go a little bit longer, a few minutes longer here. Any questions? I appreciated your differentiation of do aliens exist versus how are they coming here? And your numbers were spot on in terms of what we know from satellites. Our newest telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope, will have the ability to see the atmospheres of exoplanets. So we could possibly start putting some numbers as to Earth-like planets. But again, the question is, the sheer statistics versus also the technology that need to come here. So very, very important points. Of course, they all could have came in the 70s and nobody noticed. That's another possibility.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, we should probably also distinguish the current community of UFO believers from the ancient alien people. It's a slightly different community of people. Like any of those History Channel series shows, the ancient aliens. It's kind of a different vibe, entirely different set of arguments, but it's always, aliens. Again, it's kind of a God of the gaps argument. If you scientists or archaeologists can explain what this thing it was for, then we're going to conclude it must have been aliens. It's almost like that's their default position to take, and that's of course illogical, because that would be the extraordinary hypothesis, not the ordinary one.
Agreed. Any questions? Feel free to unmute your mic.
I'm happy to jump in, Michael. Thank you. I apologize. I joined a little bit late, but I apologize for spamming the chat with quotes from government officials. But I'm former DOD. I was also at the State Department.
Oh, good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was
give us the rundown.
Yeah, I was a bomb administration appointee, and then I worked on weapons of mass destruction issues at the State Department. To be very clear, I did not work on UAP or the new term UAP while I was in. But when I look at this from at the level of the statements that are coming out of very high level officials, and I'm seeing them making some. When you put all the dots together, and I'm using my analytic kind of mind here, when you put these dots together in these statements, it tells an interesting story. I'm certainly not on the alien train, but there's something going on here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have a chance to look through some of these quotes, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Are you MV? Yes, you're
That's
MV,
me.
right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, here's some quotes. I've talked to these pilots and they know they saw something. Yes, indeed. And the radar is locked onto it and they don't know what it is. And we don't know what it is. We hope it's not an adversary here on Earth that has this kind of technology. Again, I'm quite sure that's not the case for reasons I already said. And as we've seen recently with the Ukraine war, the Russians don't have anything that's surprising. I mean, it's actually surprising how bad they're doing technologically. So if they had, again, we don't have to go to nukes or tactical nukes. If they just had some kind of incredible drones that they were using or spy craft, we would know about it. I mean, they'd be shot down or we would see it. And there's nothing, so that's very telling, I think. So yes, again, I'm not saying that the pilots are making stuff up or delusional, nothing like that. No, I'm sure they saw something. For sure. The question is, what's the something? Now, my intuitions tell me that somebody in the Pentagon knows exactly what these videos represent. And again, I mean, they have the resources. If someone like Mick West can do these long analyses and go, okay, it's more likely to be the rotating FLIR, this, that, there has to be people in the Pentagon that know this. And that why don't they tell us? I don't know. Probably for the same reason they didn't tell us back in 47 what the spy balloons were up to. There's probably national security reasons to not tell us. I get that. You don't have to go down the full conspiratorial train of they're lying to us because they're bad people. The government's lie to their citizens, or they just lying's not the right word. So lies of omission. They just don't tell us. You don't have to tell citizens everything. And so, I'm sure they know. They probably very likely know, or it's just in a small bin, that 5% maybe of, who knows? We don't know what it is.
I can push back on that slightly. We've got quotes from President Obama. We got a quote from former Director of National Intelligence, Ratcliffe, saying there are technologies we don't have, and frankly, that we are not capable of defending against. And that's based on multiple sensors. We're talking about satellites, IR, radar, visual observation. So you're getting multiple sensors tracking whatever this is. You have the Director of National Intelligence, the top intelligence official in the US government, saying, we don't know what they are and we cannot defend against them. I find that interesting. As the former government employee, my radar is going on
here. Yeah, again, former, it's possible somebody in the department now knows and just not telling us. But again, let's just carry that thought experiment out. I just use the Russian example. Okay, maybe it's Chinese or somebody else, but who else would it be? And we know everything that the Chinese are doing with their most advanced technologies. With spyware, with hacking, with malware. We have pretty much everything they have. When they hack us, we can hack them right back at the same level. And we know about their nuke program, and they know about ours. And we know what their computer technologies, their search engines are capable of. We even know pretty much more or less what their viral labs are doing or not doing well. So to think that, but in this one area of aeronautical engineering, they've somehow leapfrogged decades ahead of us, and we have no idea how they did this. It's possible. I'm just saying it's not very likely. I mean, back to the Manhattan Project, when one reason some scientists realized something was up was that the physics journals all of a sudden quit publishing anything about, the kinds of physics that would be related to atomic research, atomic energy, that kind of thing. I'm not saying this right, but but the kind of research you'd see in physics journals all of a sudden stopped. And so some people thought, okay, they've figured out the fission thing and they know what's going on here. And because, they've gone quiet. So no one gets very far ahead. So even if, so Barack Obama, there's footage and records of objects in the skies that we don't know exactly what they are. We can't explain how they move, their trajectory. Well, see, I think just watch Mick's analyses. I'm not saying, he's not even saying, I know this is it. He's saying, this is one possibility. And then what's more likely? It's the rotating lens of the, reflected on the whatever. It's the heat signature from the F-18 engine moving away from us, so it doesn't look like it's moving left or right. Or that it's the other two hypotheses. And to me, it always comes down to that's more likely. And my suspicions are, last point, my suspicions are in 10 years or 20 years, we're going to hear about it. They're going to go, oh, that's what it was. Okay. Finally, they told us.
and I promise I'll shut up after this, but I've engaged in lengthy discussions with Mick himself. And I can say this in complete honesty. I've spoken with the patent holder of the AT FLIR targeting pod. That is a targeting pod that is used in all of those. Right. Yeah, no, this is God's honest truth. You can, I'm happy to share this with you offline.
But I trust you. Yeah.
But he said what Mick describes is impossible. The pod does not rotate that way. It does not display infrared glare, which is what Mick is claiming that this is. So this is a straight from the horse's mouth, and I think the patent holder would know how his technology works. So I promise I'll shut up after that. But
interesting. That's good. You know what? Mick's always asking me what he should do for his next column, so I'll ask him about that. Maybe that's the one.
Please do.
Mick's a super open guy. No, he's a stand-up guy, and if he's wrong, and he will change it in a heartbeat. I know, because he just wants to know the truth.
Yep. Even far more interesting is the 3D modeling that has been going on of the flight path of some of these objects, and it certainly does not support Mick's interpretation. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer those questions later.
I just want to mention too that Merrick has done some excellent work on that. So definitely take a look at that. And his colleagues.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Great questions. Great discussion.
Professor Shermer, I have a question. Just to go back a little bit what you're talking about with Merrick. If this is some kind of secret American technology, it doesn't make a sense if we're worried about off the east and west coast of foreign adversarial spying, that we would ever test any kind of advanced technology in those areas. It seems really dangerous if it crashed into the water. They could get. So if the Office of the DNI released that report recently to Congress, saying that that there are these objects without any discernible means of propulsion that are maneuvering abruptly against the wind. It must be that they have some data, some data that they're not showing to us, at least not yet. Because in the recently redacted UAPTF report, they did say they have geointelligence, so satellites with videos and images of these UAP. So they've got something. The question is what?
Yeah, now you could reverse the direction of that question of us being concerned about crashing. Why wouldn't the Chinese be concerned about one of their drones or spy craft buzzing our military airspace? And then we got it. We capture one of them, we down them, or it crashes or whatever. Again, that, just it seems like it would be the same problem for them. And wouldn't we have something like along those lines? Yet one of them crashed and we nabbed it. Maybe it has happened and they're just not going to tell us for good reason, national security reasons. I don't know. At this point, we're kind of hitting an epistemological wall. We only know so much and we're only given so much information. The UAP report last June, it was pretty thin on details. I was hoping for a lot more. Everybody was hoping for a lot more. It was just basically, we can explain a few of them. There's a lot we can't explain and we don't know. We're going to work on it some more. Oh, great. Thanks. And if you look at the history of Area 51, a lot of the sightings back then were of what we now know as, the U-2 spy plane or the Delta winged SR-71. And, a lot of the technology was developed right here in Southern California, Burbank, at the Skunk Works. And so it is possible for people to keep secrets. I will give my conspiracy theory friends that nod. It is possible for people to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, and actually keep their secrets. That happened for a long time, for decades. And we didn't know about that. And, somehow they moved these craft from Burbank all the way out to the desert and tested them. And, we didn't find out about it. The public didn't find out about it till decades later. So it's possible. It's our own technology and departments are not communicating with each other. And so we have these UAPs and no one will tell us what they are. That's possible.
I would just push back against that a little bit, that it would not get to the point of the ODNI releasing a report to Congress. I would think that those secret programs would go to them and say, hey, this is us. Don't talk about this. We don't want our foreign adversaries to know anything about this.
Andrew, you're spot on. I can assure you that Marco Rubio, Senator Gillibrand, all the senators and congressmen and women who are digging into this, Senator Graham, Senator Blunt, they're all co-sponsoring legislation to investigate this phenomenon with the most vigor and aggressive approach that I think anybody could imagine. I don't think they'd be talking about this. Somebody in the executive branch would be telling them to hush up if these were black programs. And I'd also just add that recently there was a much more heavily redacted, but the full UAP report was released, I think, about a week ago. And I put that link into the chat if anybody's interested. A lot more interesting stuff in there.
Merrick, if you had to put a Bayesian probability on it, with which hypothesis you think is most likely to explain the UAPs, what would you say?
I'm a careful former government employee, and I'm not going to comment here. I just don't have enough information.
But your former government, it's okay. Come on. The men in black are not going to come to your house.
Yeah, no. Well, there are no men in black. I don't believe there's a sweeping conspiracy. I don't think Roswell was an alien crash. I certainly do not. But if you do go back and look back through the decades, there have been some extraordinary reports that have not been explained. You have some highly credible individuals that have reported some very, very incredible sightings. So it's tough. I don't know what to tell you. I think I'm glad that the government and the Congress is putting the executive's feet to the fire on this. And I think we'll get an answer one way or another in a few years.
I also just want to mention.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to riff a little bit more on the WikiLeaks. I had the slide about, there was an absence of evidence in the WikiLeaks program, WikiLeaks leaks about government secrets that we didn't know what was going on. Congress didn't approve it. There's, warrantless wiretaps, essentially surveillance of Americans' communications, including even that of, foreign leaders and so on, that we didn't know, even during the Obama administration. So that was pretty emblematic of, I think, the idea of conspiracy theorists who think the government is up to no good a lot of the times. Yeah, sometimes that does happen. But on the other hand, where are the secret memos that WikiLeaks released related to any of the UFO stuff? There was almost nothing in there about that. not to mention 9/11 as an inside job or anything like that. More along the lines of kind of what we understand, like looking for reasons to invade Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction that didn't turn out to be true. Things like that we know that go on. Large corporations and big government agencies kind of contriving to do things that they want without our knowledge or approval. That does happen a lot, so it's possible, again, we're all being duped. Maybe the State Department doesn't mind all this chatter about UAPs because they know it's something else entirely, and this is a nice bit of misdirection, misinformation being, flooding the zone. Who knows? We just don't know.
I think if I may, I'll just chime in. I think a lot of the conspiracy theories and where we sit now is rooted in one particular incident in, I believe it was July of 1952. Hi, Sally. Bye, Sally. And this is, some may be familiar with this, but there was a series of sightings over the Washington, D.C. area. And this is height of the Cold War, right? 1952, we've got the Soviets, the Red Threat, the nuclear concerns. And the CIA convened a panel and said, we got to stop this because citizens are calling in and overwhelming our reporting mechanisms. And this is back when radar was not ubiquitous. And there was literally a ground observation corps. There was, I think, 750,000 American citizens who signed up to actually watch the skies to see if Soviets would fly bombers and conduct a sneak attack. And reports, especially this DC encounter, really caused the government to panic. And they said, hey, the Soviets will sneak up on us. And they said, we got to knock this stuff out of we got to knock it away. We got to, this is where debunking really started. We got to tamp down these reports. And that's, I think, how a lot of these conspiracy theories started, because you had individuals reporting what they thought were credible sightings, and the government said, oh, no, that's just Venus. No, that's just swamp gas. And naturally, people will fill in that gap with, oh my God, I know what I saw. They're telling me it's nothing. And you see this dynamic develop, I think, and the government ultimately got out of the business for I think a variety of reasons. But I think the source of this is that July 1952 encounter. And that's when the CIA set up a panel to really set out and have the government debunk UFO sightings.
And then
I think we'll have to wrap up there. Coming up, a very fascinating discussion. And if I can just maybe put a final word in, as someone who works for NASA and an astrophysicist, if you were to write a paper and you were to send it to me and your conclusion was that this was extraterrestrial and aliens, the evidence doesn't rise there. Could it be things we don't understand? Sure. Could it be that some explanations are not as accurate as we would like? Sure. But the burden of proof is on the extraordinary claims. And I don't think anything has happened here to change that. So let's thank Michael Shermer again for a fascinating talk and for your interest. And please join us again next month for another installment of Blowing Off Steam. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks,